I always considered myself lucky. Well, lucky might not be the best word. Let's call it fortunate. Ever since I was a kid, I somehow managed to avoid trouble, even when it walked right behind me. It was as if I had some built-in radar for danger. But luck has its limits, and I think mine ran out that night. The night I decided robbing the Mafia was a brilliant idea. This story started with a petty theft and ended on the verge of life and death. And trust me, I'm not exaggerating. My crew consisted of 5 guys, each with their own specialty. We were all different, but one thing we had in common was a thirst for money and a talent for skirting the law. They all knew that messing with the Mafia was a bad idea, the kind you stay far away from. But I had a different plan. I won't say it was a genius plan. Geniuses don't end up in situations like mine. But at the time, it seemed very appealing. So, we were what people in our neighborhood called successful losers. You know the type, the ones who never got into serious legal trouble, but didn't exactly lead virtuous lives either. Robbing small stores, breaking into rich people's homes, that was our daily routine. Everything changed when I overheard an interesting piece of news. We often met at a small bar on the edge of town. The owner, Grisha, was an old friend, and nobody paid attention to the place except the regulars. It was perfect for discussing business. The noise of music, the smell of cigarette smoke, and the steady flow of customers made our conversations invisible. It was here that I first heard about the Black Hats. One evening, sitting at the worn-out bar counter, I overheard 2 men at a nearby table. They were talking about a huge shipment of cash, an amount so large that my breath caught in my throat. The Black Hats had scored big and were planning to store the money in one of their warehouses until they figured out a safe way to move it out of the country. The idea was too tempting to ignore. As soon as the men left, I turned to the guys at my table and, with barely contained excitement, laid out the plan. The Mafia had a massive cash stash, and if we managed to steal it, we could solve all our financial problems for years to come. But instead of support, I was met with 5 irritated faces. "Max, are you out of your mind? We gave up on risky jobs like that ages ago," said Sam, my longtime partner, locksmith, and expert in breaking locks. His eyes showed genuine concern, and the rest of the guys shared his sentiment. "Do you really think we can rob the Mafia and get away with it?" added Victor, our driver, nervously gripping his beer glass. He was the calmest of us all, but even he could feel the tension in the air. "Listen, guys, I get your fears, but think about it rationally," I said, trying to persuade them. "We won't be stealing in broad daylight. No one will even realize what happened until we're already out of town. It's the perfect plan." It seemed like they needed time to digest my words. For a few days, we didn't discuss the topic, but I could see their curiosity growing. They could act like the Mafia didn't interest them, but money? Money always has a way of changing people's minds. A week later, they started asking me questions. "How do you propose we pull this off?" Sam finally asked during our next meeting. I had been waiting for this moment. My heart began to race as I pulled out a folded piece of paper from my pocket and laid it out on the table. It was the plan, and the plan was to break their security system. I had spent weeks studying every possible angle. We knew where the warehouse was located, what the building looked like, how many patrols worked at night, how many guards were on duty. Everything was meticulously calculated. I even had inside information from a contact who used to work for the Mafia. He had shared details about the internal alarm system. We only get one shot at this. If anything goes wrong, we're all dead, I admitted. It was the truth, and everyone knew it. Finally, we moved on to the preparation stage. Each of us had a role to play in the operation. Victor was responsible for transportation, He needed to find a car that could get us out of the scene quickly and discreetly. He spent a week studying routes, mapping out the best escape paths, and calculating the timing to avoid any intersections with traffic cameras. Sam, being our locksmith, was the key player when it came to breaking locks and doors. He spent days searching for the right tools and practicing techniques to get into the building swiftly and quietly. His experience in lockpicking was undeniable, but this time he was facing something bigger. The locks at the Mafia's stash house weren't the cheap Chinese ones he had cracked in apartments. These were high-grade mechanisms, and they had to be broken without leaving any trace. I, as the brains behind the operation, coordinated the preparation. I went over the plan again and again, refining every detail, replaying every possible scenario in my head. I knew that our chances of success rested in my hands. The night of the operation finally arrived. The city was asleep, and we moved like shadows through its streets. It was quiet, too quiet. It made us all nervous, though none of us showed it. We were preparing for the worst. I could see Sam nervously grinning, Victor chain-smoking cigarettes, while Sergey, our tech guy, checked the equipment one last time. We pulled up to the warehouse. The old building looked completely unremarkable. On the outside, it was just a dilapidated structure, something no one would pay attention to. But we knew what was hidden inside, a fortress of weapons and cash. I squinted into the darkness, trying to spot any movement. But the street was empty. "All clear," Sam whispered as we got out of the car. He was the first to approach the door, pulling out his tools and getting to work. We all hid in the shadows, watching his every move. Even in the slightest silence, I could hear him working on the lock. Every sound seemed deafening, the click of metal, the soft scrape of his tools. I watched him, holding my breath, knowing that if he made a mistake, it was over for us. We wouldn't even know what hit us. "Done," Sam whispered, and the door creaked open just a sliver. We slipped inside. Now, the real game of survival began. Inside, the building was much more polished than it looked from the outside. I'd even say it had been recently renovated. The hallways were clean. Surveillance cameras lined the walls, hidden behind protective glass. But we had a plan. Sergey, our tech guy, had already hacked the security system days ago. For the black hats, everything looked normal. The cameras and alarms still appeared active. They had no idea we were already inside. We moved silently, like ghosts. Each of us knew the route by heart. But the deeper we went into the building, the more the tension built. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the guards could hear it. But so far, everything seemed to be going according to plan. We hadn't encountered a single soul. Sam motioned towards a door at the end of the hallway. It was the entrance to the basement, the place where the money was stored. We approached cautiously and stopped in front of a massive metal door. I'd never seen locks like these before. Even Sam looked a bit uncertain. "Can you break it?" I asked, my heart thudding like a ticking clock. He licked his lips, nodded, and without another word, got to work on the lock. I could see beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He felt the pressure. We all did. Time was slipping away. Maybe the Mafia had already noticed something was off. Maybe our preparation wasn't as flawless as we thought. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Sam kept working, not stopping for a second. Finally, there was a soft click. The lock gave in. I exhaled in relief, and we opened the door. Inside the basement was what we had risked our lives for. Money. So much money it could have lasted us all several lifetimes. Black bags stuffed with $100 bills were piled on tables and on the floor, almost filling the room. My eyes lit up. All of this was about to become ours. Time short, Grab what you can and let's get out of here, I ordered as we started packing the bags. Each of us grabbed as much as we could, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The room was too quiet. My ears seemed to pick up on some invisible signal. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't figure out what. Max, this is way too easy, Victor whispered as we packed the last bag. His eyes kept darting around nervously, constantly glancing at the door, as if expecting an ambush at any moment. Keep it together, Vit, I whispered back, trying to calm both him and myself. We've planned everything. The system is down. There are no guards here. We just grab the money and vanish. But the unease gnawed at me. It was like some inner voice was trying to warn me of danger, but my mind refused to listen. We moved towards the exit, but just as we stepped out of the basement, everything went wrong. I barely had time to process what happened. One of the guards we hadn't noticed earlier suddenly appeared in front of us. His face was contorted with rage, and he had a machine gun in his hands. "Freeze, you bastards!" he shouted, aiming the gun at us. Time seemed to stop. I could feel cold sweat running down my back. This was it. We were caught, and now we'd be gunned down right here, in this hallway. But surprisingly, the guard didn't shoot right away. Maybe he was too confident in himself, or maybe he just wanted to toy with us before ending our lives. Whatever the reason, it gave us a chance. And that was all we needed. Drop the bags. I whispered to Victor and Sam, but they already knew what to do. Sam threw his bag straight at the guard, blocking his view for just a second. It was our one shot, and we took it. Victor lunged forward first, tackling the guard to the ground. It was a brief struggle. Sam swung a crowbar, knocking the man unconscious. Without wasting a second, we bolted for the exit. The floor beneath us seemed to burn as our footsteps echoed louder with every step. We burst outside, but what we saw made my heart sink again. 2 more guards were standing by our car, their faces full of menace. They were waiting for us. I glanced at Victor. His hands were trembling slightly, but his eyes still had that fire in them. "This is our last chance," I whispered, scanning the darkness, trying to assess the situation. I still don't know how we managed to outsmart those guards. Maybe it was our cold-bloodedness. When one of them approached the car to check it again, Victor snuck up behind him and knocked him out with a single blow. The second one didn't even have time to raise the alarm before Sam swung his crowbar again. We loaded the bags into the car and sped off. The tires screeched ominously as we raced away. The street was dark, and our hearts pounded in rhythm with the car's engine. I thought that was the end, that we had won, escaped death's clutches. But sometimes the worst part comes after you think it's over. And that's exactly what happened to us. We raced through the city at breakneck speed. The streets were empty. No one saw us flying through the intersections. But then I noticed something. Headlights in the rearview mirror. At first, just one pair. Then another. And that's when I realized. We were being followed. The black hats had figured out what happened, and now they were on our tail. "This can't be happening," I muttered, staring into the mirror. The headlights were getting closer. Much closer. "What is it?" Victor asked, a note of worry in his voice. But I wasn't listening anymore. The adrenaline hit me like a freight train. The robbery was over, but this was just the beginning. The escape, that's what could really kill us. I barely had time to think about our odds when I heard the roar of an engine behind us. "They're on us," I shouted, trying to keep control of the situation. Victor glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the same thing I did. We were trapped. The streets that had seemed so empty just a few minutes ago had come alive. The Mafia's cars were closing in. There were 3 of them, and they were approaching from all directions. "We're in deep trouble," Sam muttered from the passenger seat, his hands clenched into fists. Even in the dark, I could see the fear overtaking his usual calm. "Hey, stay cool," Victor yelled, pressing down on the gas pedal. "We still have a chance. We know this city better than they do. I'll lose them in the alleys." I glanced at him, trying to calm my own racing heart. Yeah, Victor was right. If there was anyone we could count on in this situation, it was him. He knew every alley, every hidden corner of this city. After all, he had planned this route in advance, thinking through the worst-case scenario. The car shot forward, tires screeching as we flew down the narrow streets. Victor expertly weaved through the alleys, trying to shake the pursuers. I saw one of the Mafia's cars fail to make a sharp turn and crash into a parked vehicle, but the other two were still on us. "They're not going to give up that easily," Sergei shouted from the back seat as we swerved into another alley. The headlights flickered in the mirrors, a constant reminder of the danger closing in. Victor made another sharp turn, trying to lose the Mafia cars, but they clearly knew what they were doing. They must have been locals too, just as familiar with these streets as we were. We were going at full speed, but the distance between us and them was closing with every second. "If they catch up, we're dead," Sam said, looking at me. His eyes betrayed real fear. I tried to think through every possible option. We needed a plan, but there wasn't enough time. The only choice was to trust Victor and hope he could find a way out of this deadly chase. "This is our chance," Victor suddenly shouted. "Hold on." We turned down another alley, but this time I realized where we were heading. An abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. The place was notorious for its long-abandoned factories and warehouses, places no one had used in years. The perfect place to hide. Our car skidded to a halt near one of the old, crumbling buildings. We jumped out, leaving the car where the pursuers wouldn't see it right away. As we sprinted into the darkness, I could hear the sound of engines. The Mafia's cars pulled up not far behind us. Now they were searching on foot. Damn it, how did we even get into this mess? Sam panted as we hid behind one of the warehouse walls. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes darting from corner to corner. I looked around. Our chances were slim, but I had a feeling that if we stuck together, we had a shot. We just needed to wait for the right moment. The Mafia guys were getting closer, their voices echoing through the empty warehouse. "They're already here," Victor whispered, peeking around the corner. We stood in the shadows, pressing ourselves against the cold concrete wall. The sound of footsteps was unmistakable. They were getting closer. I could feel the fear creeping up on me. Just a little more and they'd find us. But in that moment, I remembered the gun tucked into my waistband. I slowly reached for it, trying not to make a sound. "Max, what are you doing?" Sergei whispered, noticing my movements. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us," I whispered back. "If we don't strike first, they'll kill us." I took a step forward, but just then, the cursed alarm went off. It was one of the Mafia's cars, and its siren blared through the night. We all winced at the sound, knowing it was anything but good for us. And then all hell broke loose. One of the guards spotted us. "There!" he shouted and fired his gun. The bullet whizzed past my shoulder, hitting the wall behind me. "Run!" I yelled, and we bolted into the darkness of the warehouse. Everything around us turned into chaos. Shouting, gunfire, the scrape of footsteps on the floor. I don't remember how we made it out of the warehouse. It was all a blur. When we finally stumbled out onto the street, I felt like my body had been drained of every last ounce of energy. My lungs burned from the lack of air. My legs felt like they were about to give out. But we couldn't stop. Victor waved us toward an old drainage pipe that led beneath the city. It was our last option. Crawl in and hide. This way, he shouted, and we dashed toward the pipe. None of us cared how dangerous or filthy it was. The only thing that mattered was getting away from our pursuers. We scrambled into the dark tunnel, panting with fear and exhaustion. We crawled through the cold, slick surface of the pipes, making our way through dark, damp corridors of the old tunnels. The flashlights in our hands trembled, casting weak beams of light through the thick darkness. But we kept moving forward, trying not to look at each other or speak. I thought about how quickly everything had changed, from a simple plan to a fight for survival. Now, every step we took felt like it could be our last, and we all knew it. But hiding in the dark was our only option. We all feared making one wrong move, one sound that could give us away. As we moved deeper into the tunnel, I could hear our breaths growing louder. We were all exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept us going was wearing off. My heart was still racing, but now it was mixed with dread. Every drop of sweat that rolled down my face added to the anxiety. We kept moving through the tunnel until we reached a fork. Victor stopped and listened. We all froze. In the silence of the tunnel, we could hear the footsteps of our pursuers getting closer. They were moving toward us, and our time was running out. "We need to hide," Victor whispered. "If they find us here, we can't defend ourselves." We looked around for a place to hide in the narrow space, but there was almost nothing. The only option was to crouch behind a few metal pipes that ran along the walls of the tunnel. It was risky, but we had no other choice. Pressing ourselves against the cold metal, we tried to breathe as quietly as possible. Time dragged on endlessly. I could hear the footsteps getting closer, the voices of the Mafia guys echoing down the tunnel. They were so close now, I could almost feel their presence. Now, they were only a few meters away. One of the pursuers stopped just a few feet from me. He scanned the area, his flashlight sweeping across the dark corners of the tunnel. I could smell his tobacco, mixing with the damp scent of the tunnel. In that moment, it felt like he was about to point right at us and say, "There they are." I felt Sergei's hand gripping mine, trying to keep from losing control. It was one of those moments where time seemed to freeze, and you weren't sure if you'd take another breath. But then, a miracle happened. The Mafia guys, after wandering around for a few more seconds, slowly turned around and began walking back. I couldn't believe we'd pulled it off. They hadn't noticed us. They must have thought we'd already fled further down the tunnel. "Don't move," Victor whispered. He kept us still for a few more minutes until the sound of our pursuers faded completely. Only then did we dare to rise slowly and continue moving. My hands were shaking, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. I barely had control over myself, but we couldn't stop. Victor led us through another exit of the tunnel, which brought us out into an old district of the city where abandoned factories had stood since the last century. Here, we were finally safe. We emerged into the cool night air, greeted by the damp winds. The silence around us felt eerie, but it was a sign of freedom. We stood there, still not fully realizing that we had survived. "Is everyone alive?" I asked, trying to piece my thoughts together. Sam nodded, breathing heavily. Victor wiped the sweat from his forehead and leaned against the wall of the nearest building. Sergei, holding his side, carefully sat down on the curb. We were all exhausted, but faint smiles appeared on our faces. We had done it. We had survived robbing the Mafia, and we had the bags of cash. However, even in that moment of triumph, I had a strange feeling that this wasn't the end. We had escaped, but we all knew something bigger awaited us. The Mafia doesn't forgive so easily. They would come for us, and it was only a matter of time. I glanced at the bag lying next to me and thought, was it all really worth it? Was it worth risking our lives for this fortune? Had we made the biggest mistake of our lives? Max, what now? Sam's voice, hoarse from stress, brought me back to reality. He pulled out a cigarette, nervously lighting it and exhaling smoke into the cool night air. I looked at him, at the guys sitting nearby. Victor was still staring at us, but his eyes were empty, as if he had already seen all the possible outcomes of our future. Sergei sat, holding his head in his hands, obviously battling his own fears. We were all exhausted, physically and mentally. Now we disappear from the city, I muttered quietly, though I didn't quite believe my own words. No one responded. We all knew that after what had happened, disappearing wouldn't help. The Black Hats wouldn't forgive us. If they decided we owed them something, there was nowhere to hide. I could feel it in every fiber of my being. But as long as we had hope, we had to act. We've already discussed the plan for if things went sideways, I reminded them, trying to maintain a sliver of composure. We split the money, and everyone goes their separate ways. We lay low for a while. After that, we'll meet in another city. This is pointless, Sergei said quietly, his voice sounding defeated. No matter how we hide, they'll find us. You know that, Max? I averted my eyes. He was right. Deep down, I knew that too. But there was one but. Giving up now meant death. And I had never been one to give up. Survival was the only thing that had kept me afloat. Maybe it wasn't the best life strategy, but it hadn't failed me yet. Listen, Sergei, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We have the money. We made it out alive. And as long as we're alive, we have a chance. If we give up now, they'll find us and kill us. But if we split up, they won't be able to catch us all at once. One of us will survive. And that's enough to keep hiding. My voice lacked the confidence I wanted it to have. I knew I was trying to convince not just them, but myself too. Because in the back of my mind, there was one thought I couldn't shake. The Mafia always finds you. Always. But the fear was too great to just sit and wait for the inevitable. Max is right, Sam suddenly said, exhaling smoke and flicking his cigarette onto the asphalt. We knew the risks going in. We knew this wouldn't be easy. Our only shot now is to stay one step ahead. Victor got to his feet, pulled the car keys from his pocket, and looked at me. I'll go first. I'll take my share of the money and disappear. If you don't hear from me in 2 weeks, that means I'm safe. Then let's divide the money, and everyone goes their own way, I added. The guys nodded silently. We knew we couldn't stay in this area any longer than necessary. Each of us quickly grabbed our share of the cash, splitting the bags into equal parts. Although, the money didn't bring the sense of relief I had imagined it would. Instead, it felt like a burden that threatened to crush us all. Once everything was ready, Victor was the first to head to the car. His silhouette quickly disappeared into the darkness, leaving the rest of us to wait for our turn to leave. A few days passed after we split up. I left the city early the next morning. Victor managed to let me know that he'd left and was hiding out in a nearby region. I had a little time to disappear. I headed north, to a small town where I had an old contact. He was one of those guys who could set up any kind of fake identity, passports, driver's licenses, bank accounts. I needed to become a whole new person. I spent 3 days in a small hotel, waiting for the documents. Every phone call or knock at the door sent me into a panic. I couldn't sleep properly, constantly expecting that the Mafia would find me even in this quiet place. On the 4th day, when the documents were ready, I got a troubling call. It was Sam. "Max, we've got problems," he said, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The Mafia. They found Victor. Turns out someone from our team blabbed even before the heist. They knew more about us than we thought." I clenched the phone in my hand. It had all been for nothing. Victor was dead, and now they'd be hunting down each of us. The fear came back, stronger than ever. "I managed to escape," Sam continued, "but I don't know how much time I have. They know who we are now, Max. They're coming for you." I lowered the phone. It felt like the whole world had spun out of control. Suddenly, the money didn't matter anymore. With every heartbeat, the fear grew stronger. That same evening, I packed my things and left the hotel. The new documents were in my hands, but they suddenly seemed worthless. I left everything behind: my old life, my friends, even my share of the money. The only thing that mattered now was survival. I changed cities, heading to a completely different part of the country. Now, I was someone else with a new name and a new biography. But the fear stayed with me. It had become my constant companion. Time passed, and it seemed like the danger had faded. A month went by, then another. I stopped looking over my shoulder every time I walked down the street. Life seemed to be returning to normal. But one night, when I came home after a long day, I was greeted by darkness. 3 men in black suits. I understood everything without them saying a word. "The Mafia never forgets," one of them said as I stood before them. This was the end. My biggest lesson? If you decide to play with the Mafia, be prepared for a game with no winners. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future episodes. Your comments mean a lot to me, so let me know what you think about this story. And if you noticed any inaccuracies or mistakes, feel free to point them out. I'm always striving to improve and create better content for you. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode.